And then it shall be free.
What's up, everybody? It's Young here with my hands-on impressions of Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Before I begin, I want to thank Robert Peeler, community manager over at Konami, for allowing me the opportunity to play 1 hour of the game at E3 2015. This small play session was more than enough to convince me that Phantom Pain is destined for greatness. The mission that I played was Kaz's rescue mission, which is the first mission after the hospital scene, according to what the MGS5 preview articles have stated. It began exactly like you saw in the previous demos, with a cutscene showing Ocelot and Snake making their way through a sandstorm. There were two notable differences, however. One was that opening credits were being shown throughout the cutscene, similarly to when Snake reached Mission 3's starting point in the latest E3 2015 demo, featuring names like Punished Venom Snake, Benedict's Kazuhira Miller, and Revolver Shalashaska Ocelot. The second difference was that Ocelot was wearing sunglasses. The credits listed them as JF Eyewear Ocelot Gear. I believe Kojima is planning to sell these as merchandise alongside his own brand of glasses and Kaz's aviators. Anyway, after the cutscene played, I was taken to the portion of the intro cutscene that was always skipped in the demos. What happens here is a sort of mini tutorial in which Ocelot teaches you how to use the iDroid and the binoculars, or as he called it, the IntScope, which is short for Intel Scope. I was able to move the camera around, but movement was completely disabled. As Ocelot was briefing me on what happened with Kaz and what my objectives are, he made me open the iDroid and place a map marker on the village where he's being held. He then told me that I would first need to find intel at another village, so he had me use the IntScope to look at said village in the distance, from which a blinking light was emanating to give me indication of where to point at. In the interest of time, I just skipped the rest of the tutorial to get to the game. I was then taken back to the second part of the familiar cutscene. After Ocelot finished his whole speech, I was seamlessly taken into the game. From there, I was free to do whatever I wanted. I began by trying to get used to the horse's controls, which didn't take long because they felt great. It did take a bit of time to get used to using the square button to sprint on horseback rather than using the L3 button like I would on foot, but that very quickly became a non-issue. So I began riding across the desert, breathing in the vastness of the open world and its beautiful vistas. If I really looked for it, then yes, I could see some fade-in from time to time, mostly when it came to foliage and some of the more detailed textures, which is inevitable for a game of this magnitude. But I quickly found myself more focused on my immediate surroundings and avoiding detection, and eventually I just forgot all about it. Honestly, fade-in is the last thing you'll be focused on unless you are seriously an intense graphics whore. It's subtle enough that your brain will stop registering it the more you play the game. Now, do keep in mind that I only had an hour with the game, so this isn't final verdict yet, but it's a good start. So anyway, as I was riding along the desert, I eventually came upon a small enemy encampment. Ocelot quickly radioed in to warn me to slow down and to lean on the horse's side to avoid detection, which could easily be done by hitting the X button. Switching sides was as simple as hitting the R3 button. After I settled in, Ocelot suggested via radio that I attempt to take the two station guards out for practice, and that's exactly what I did. I got off the horse and began my practice infiltration round. I knocked out one of the guards with my tranquilizer gun, as I felt the need to test out the game's aiming. If you've played and mastered Ground Zeroes' shooting mechanics, bullet drop and everything, then you'll be right at home in Phantom Pain. The second guard I took out a little more extravagantly with my brand new prosthetic arm. In Phantom Pain, the prosthetic arm is considered a secondary weapon, so I held the down button on the D-pad to bring up my secondary weapons, which at the time consisted of my tranquilizer gun and the bionic arm. I highlighted the bionic arm, read the description, which detailed that I could deliver a powerful blow by pressing the R2 button, aka the CQC button, while sprinting, and then I went to work. I snuck behind the guard who was looking towards the desert's horizon and broke into a sprint. The guard eventually heard my footsteps and turned around, resulting in the activation of reflex mode, but by then it was too late for him. I had closed enough of the gap. I hit R2 mid-sprint, and Snake swung his bionic arm with mighty force, knocking the guard out silly. This sequence only lasted a few seconds, but it felt incredibly satisfying, in no small part thanks to the metallic clank sound accompanying the blow. To finish off my practice infiltration, I Fultoned the guards back to Mother Base, and that was that. I got back on D-Horse and proceeded straight to Dawiala Kalai, which was where the intel on Kaz's exact location resided. Most of you have probably seen this area being infiltrated and this objective being fulfilled in the previous demos. As I approached the enemy base, Ocelot radioed in, suggesting that I find some high ground and scout the area, and I did just that. I found a hill of sand overlooking the base, and I proceeded by tagging as many tangos as I could. Then I dived in. I decided to forego exploration in favor of completing the mission within the small time frame that I was given, so I snuck in swiftly using the obstacles and edifices that were scattered throughout the base. At one point, I did attempt to interrogate a guard to hopefully find a more exact location on the intel, but at this stage in the game, I had not recruited a translator, so I couldn't get anything out of him. I had no choice but to knock him out and Fulton him. Alas, I had not noticed that there was another guard on the other side of a nearby ravaged stone wall, and to my surprise, he actually noticed the Fulton balloon lifting off. So I took cover on the wall, waited for the guard to pass through the wall's hole, and then I held him up, knocked him out, and Fultoned him to reunite him with his friend. I then looked around a bit to make sure the coast was clear and carefully made my way further into the base, and I eventually found the room that housed the intel. A brief cutscene played showing Snake using the iDroid to scan the intel, and then I snuck out of the village to make my way towards Kaz. By now I had spent enough time with the game to realize just how great Phantom Pain's controls felt. Some of the MGS5 preview articles have stated that Phantom Pain's controls feel exactly the same as Ground Zero's, but that's not entirely true. I guarantee you that they feel better and refined. A big issue I had with Ground Zeroes is that Snake always felt like he reacted slightly late when it came to movement. It had nothing to do with input lag or anything, but rather the way Snake had been animated. If you go one direction and then decide to go to another, there's a slight moment in which Snake slows down and turns around before heading towards the other direction, and this made Snake feel slightly tanky. Phantom Pain fixes this problem. I think what they did was shorten and streamline some of Snake's animations so that he reacts faster to input. It made a world of difference. They also made great strides with the cover system. I had a lot of trouble using the cover system in Ground Zeroes. I honestly rarely used it because it felt as though I had to be way too deliberate to get Snake into cover. And once he was in cover, it felt as though he was glued to it. It was very difficult to get Snake to move how I wanted when he was in cover. Phantom Pain fixes that. The way I would describe it is that if we imagine Snake as a magnet that sticks to walls, his magnetic force has been drastically loosened in Phantom Pain, so it no longer feels like players have to pull hard to get the magnet unstuck. It sticks, but you can pop it out without much effort. So streamlined animations for Snake's movement and less magnetic force on the cover system are two small changes that make a huge difference in tightening the controls. Anyway, back to the game. As I was making my way towards Kaz, I came across a small enemy guard post on the side of the road. It was a tent of sorts stationed by 4 guards. At this point, the sun had set, and it was night, allowing me to use the cover of darkness to attempt to take the guards out. Unfortunately, I hit the wrong button at one point, which led to Snake getting up, and I was detected. Not even reflex mode was enough to save me, as I had drawn the attention of all 4 guards. Preferring to avoid heavy confrontation, I sprinted the hell out of there. As I was doing so, I saw a flare lighting up in the sky, so it looks like at night, guards will fire flare guns to alert nearby outposts of an enemy intruder. It looked pretty cool, actually. While sprinting away, I whistled to my horse, and it arrived only a few short seconds later, sprinting alongside me, allowing me to get on its saddle in one seamless fluid motion. It was an incredibly badass and satisfying way to make a getaway. I was impressed by how well the controls had been thought out. You would think that bringing up the command wheel, calling the horse, and then saddling up in one fluid motion while sprinting would be difficult to wrap your head around, but that wasn't the case. One push of the L3 button while pushing the analog stick forward would make Snake sprint. Holding down the L1 button would bring up the commands wheel. The right analog stick would allow me to select an option, and R3 would confirm my selection, in this case being whistle. When the horse approached, sprinting alongside me, a simple push of the triangle button would send me on my way. It may sound like a lot when I put it in words, but in-game it felt very intuitive. There was this harmonious balance between left-hand and right-hand inputs, so it never felt like I was playing Twister with my fingers, which wasn't always the case in past games. Everything just worked without having to think too much about it, which is fantastic. So anyway, I eventually made my escape on horseback. Now that I knew the location of the enemy guard post, I decided to avoid confrontation altogether by going around it and by taking another road to my destination. Something that I really like about Phantom Pain is that detection no longer feels like game over, unlike in previous games in the series. I mean, sure, there's that sour feeling of not executing a perfect infiltration, but I never felt as though I wanted to restart the entire mission. The game's new mechanics in the open world gave me options. I could have just as easily chosen to engage the enemy with Phantom Pain's competent third-person shooter controls, but the open space also gave me the option to back away. After making my way around the enemy guard post, I eventually found the heavily guarded village in which Kaz was being held. Keeping in mind what Ocelot had taught me before, I decided to find a good vantage point to scout the area. The first thing that I noticed as I was overlooking the village was that it's a really big place with an overwhelming amount of edifices. Good thing I retrieved the intel that marked my map with the exact building in which Kaz was being held, because otherwise I probably would have ended up going door by door searching for Kaz all day. From the hill, I tagged as many targets as I could before making my way in, and this is when I decided to make use of the cardboard box. And let me tell you, this thing is awesome. I would never really use cardboard boxes in previous games, but now, let's just say that I know what I'll have my R&D unit dedicating most of their time to. The first thing that I did was getting used to how cardboard boxes worked in this game. What I learned was that they work differently depending on whether Snake is crouching or standing up. When crouching, Snake will use the cardboard box like you've seen in past games, except now he can do things like pop out of the top to shoot guards or dive out of the box with a dive button, which is square on the DualShock 4. When standing up, Snake will switch the box's orientation so that it's tall instead of wide. From here, Snake can open the front flap to take aim with a gun or use CQC, or he can dive with the box. This distinction is important. When crouching, Snake will dive out of the box. When standing, Snake will dive with the box. So what I did was, instead of making my way down the big hill on foot, I dived with the cardboard box on the slope, and I literally slid all the way to the outskirts of the village. It was quick, stealthy, efficient, and silly and badass in equal measures. There's a certain satisfaction in organically coming up with stuff like this in the moment. As you can imagine, the nifty box made a very good first impression, so I decided to keep using it as I infiltrated the village. I made heavy use of the ability to pop out of the box, tranking as many enemies as I could along the way. Now, at one point, one guard saw one of the tranked guards, and as he went to check on him, he had gotten a glimpse of me walking around with my cardboard box, so he shifted his attention my way. I popped back into the box and remained perfectly still, praying that he would just walk away. The guard took out his flashlight and did his thing, and at one point he actually began approaching the box. I was beginning to get a little worried, but halfway through he decided it wasn't worth the trouble and headed back to check on his friend instead. As soon as he turned around, I popped out of the box and I popped a trank dart in his skull. Problem solved. I proceeded further into the village, making use of the yellow mission marker to guide myself, and I eventually reached Kaz, who was handcuffed to a pipe and bagged over the head. But along the way I had raised the suspicion of a squadron of 3 by being briefly spotted. I dived out of their field of vision into an obstacle on time, so I didn't trigger any alarms, but they had seen enough to go into caution mode. Fortunately, I found some breathing room through the cutscene that played, which basically paused everything going on around me. And for those wondering, yes, it's the same cutscene that was partially shown in the E3 2013 trailer. After the cutscene played, everything resumed, and the squadron of 3 continued to track down the suspicious activity they saw. To my relief, I had tagged them beforehand, so I could keep track of their movements. As they circled around, I eventually found an opening, so I grabbed Kaz and quickly snuck out of there. I did get detected by one guard on my way out, but reflex mode kicked in and I made quick work of the guard by shooting him in the face with my trank gun. After a tense exfiltration, I finally made my way out of the base and into the open field. I checked my surroundings to make sure the coast was clear, and then I whistled to summon my horse. I loaded Kaz onto the horse and proceeded by making my way to the landing zone that Ocelot had designated for me. On the way there, I would from time to time hear Kaz say some things, although I forgot exactly what he said. It was nothing terribly significant, they were mostly Easter eggs. I believe at one point he referenced famous quotes like, "Kept you waiting, huh?" and "Age hasn't slowed you down one bit," but I can't recall the exact words. He also talked a bit about the bitterness and resentment he has for Cypher and the kind of life he has been living the last 9 years, but I wouldn't want to spoil too much of that. Eventually, I reached the landing zone, above where the chopper was hovering and waiting for Snake and Kaz. But as soon as I reached the destination, gas began to fill the environment, and the chopper's pilot radioed in that he had no choice but to pull out and find another landing zone. It was at that point that a cutscene played showing the creepy as fuck skulls approaching. There were 4 total, and they hadn't detected Snake at this point, so they were walking in a slow, unrhythmic, creepy, zombie-like fashion, minding their own business. Something interesting that I noticed was that with every step, some kind of squishy noise would emanate from them. Not sure what that tells us about them, but there's that. After making the point that the skulls are creepy as fuck, the game eventually shifted back to gameplay. While it was hard to see much of anything because of the gas and because it was still nighttime, their glowing eyes gave their location away. Now, I knew from the MGS5 preview that an optional objective for this mission was to sneak away from the skulls, so I tried that, but I couldn't find a way. To get to the new landing zone, I was forced to go through what I would describe as a hallway with land masses acting as walls, with a small stone bridge on the way that resided above a small shallow valley. If I tried to head back to where I came from, I would be told that I was exiting the mission area, so I had to press onwards. From what I could see, the skulls were placed in such a way that regardless of whether I went through the bridge or under the bridge and through the valley, I would get spotted no matter what. 2 of them were right in front of the bridge, and the other 2 were on the left side of the bridge in front of the valley. I knew the bridge was too openly visible and that I'd have the best chance of sneaking by through the right side of the valley. So I slowly made my way down to the sunken land, from which I could at least approach the skulls out of plain sight. I got as close as I could, and from the valley I tried throwing magazines to distract them, but they wouldn't budge. At one point, one of the skulls did catch a small glimpse of me, so he looked my way and started doing this thing where he was tilting his head from left to right in a similar fashion to a curious animal, except it wasn't cute since he was in a zombie-like pose and had super creepy glowing green eyes. Eventually, I said fuck it. I tore ass towards the rightmost side of the hallway from under the valley, and I was spotted, resulting in the activation of a special reflex mode. You know that cutscene in Ground Zeroes that plays when you roll enough to remove the XOF patch that got stuck on one of Snake's pouches? Or when you activate one of the flashbacks on the Deja Vu mission? Something very similar happens when spotted by skulls. Same quick-fire flashes and same alarming sound effects, except the flashes show different shots and angles of a now alerted skull. Within those flashes, I basically saw the skull coming back to life, so to speak, like a daydreamer who had just snapped back to reality, as if the skull had gone from zombie mode to super soldier mode in an instant. Something else that I saw during the flashes was the skull's right hand reaching into the palm of his left hand and pulling a large submachine gun out of it, one that somewhat reminded me of MGS4's P90. I shit you not, his right hand literally ghosted into his open left palm, and from it, he pulled out a submachine gun like fucking Mary Poppins. It was weird as shit and I loved it. Eventually the flashes ended and Kaz yelled at me to run. He was clearly scared shitless too, since it was the skulls that had ambushed Kaz and his unit prior to his kidnapping. I heeded his words and made a run for it on my loyal steed. What ensued thereafter was one of the coolest shit I had ever seen. These skulls are fucking scary. They can easily keep up with D-Horse's sprinting speed. I could literally see skulls sprinting right next to me, and their sprint wasn't like the Flash, who takes a bunch of little steps in a short span of time. Instead, they would take a few steps at a time, but each step would propel them many feet forward. From time to time, some of the skulls would take position at a high ground and fire away at me with their submachine gun. While that was happening, another would be sprinting alongside me, occasionally almost wall running on steep slopes if I got too close to land masses, and then another would run past me from the other side and dissipate like a ghost, and then another would leap incredible heights to get ahead of me. One after another, they would sprint, leap, shoot, appear, disappear. It was like watching a firework of monsters, ghosts, and specters happening all around me. I am telling you, this chase scene that lasted no more than a minute or two was one of the most exhilarating gaming experiences I've had in recent memory, and it was some of the most visually mesmerizing shit I had ever seen. There is nothing quite like being chased by Phantom Pain's spectral, ghost-like zombie super soldiers. As I kept treading onwards, eventually the thick gas dissipated, and Ocelot radioed in to inform me that we had lost them. I headed towards the new landing zone, loaded Kaz and myself, saw D-Horse automatically getting Fultoned, and I was on my merry way. The game faded to black, and I was shown my score screen. I got a B rank, codenamed Chick, which wasn't too bad for a rushed first-time playthrough. The score screen was followed by various report screens detailing heroism points I had gained, new soldiers I had recruited, new developments over at Mother Base, and how much Snake's bond with his support buddy, in this case D-Horse, had increased. This was then followed by a cutscene, but I'm forbidden from talking about story elements that haven't been made public, so I won't say too much about it except that Snake is eventually introduced to Mother Base. After the cutscene played, I was taken to Air Command Center. I was immediately overwhelmed by the number of options and the amount of things that I could do here. I could have gone ahead and tackled another mission in the small amount of time I had left, but I was too curious to resist diving into some of the game's cassette tapes. Unfortunately, I can't say shit about them. Suffice to say that they will definitely help paint a full picture of what happened between Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain, and then some. I will also say this, I was 99% sure that Big Boss was Big Boss before the hands-on demo, but after listening to some of the tapes, I came out 110% sure. Now, this is only the first hour of the game we're talking about, so who knows where the story will take us, but if I had to put my money on it, I'd say that the tapes make the identity of our protagonist, Big Boss, pretty clear. After listening to some tapes, one last thing that I did was take a look at the tech trees for Phantom Pain's ridiculous number of weapons. I noticed that weapons can be upgraded up to level 6, or grade 6 as it's known in Phantom Pain. And that's when I was informed that my time was up. Satisfied and smiling is an understatement for how I came out from my hands-on time. I wanted more. 1 hour was honestly not enough time to do shit. In that time, all I managed to do was rush through a mission, listen to a couple of cassette tapes, and take a look at some tech trees. I didn't even get to touch any aspect of Mother Base, its field support capabilities, the game's various customization features, side ops, and yada yada yada. I can now truly understand why Konami felt comfortable with giving other media outlets 16 hours with the game. Phantom Pain is truly massive, and I'm not just talking about volume, but also about density. This game is jam-packed with content, and I can't wait for the day that I can just sit down and really take my sweet time with all of its glorious features. And with that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions about the game, ask away in the comments below. Just keep in mind that I only had an hour with the game, and that there are some questions that I can't answer. And to be further updated on Metal Gear Solid 5, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.